Most people never escape low income for one simple reason: they keep treating it like a money problem, and sometimes it is. Sometimes the paycheck really is too small, sometimes the rent really is too high, sometimes the medical bill, the car repair, the grocery receipt, and the credit card statement all show up in the same week, and there is no clever mindset trick that fixes that. But low income is not just a money problem, it is a pressure problem. It is what happens when a person lives so close to the edge for so long that every small hit starts feeling like a major collapse. It is what happens when one flat tire can undo 3 months of effort. It is what happens when you work hard enough to stay tired, but not far enough ahead to feel safe. That is the part most people do not understand. They think the opposite of being poor is being rich. It is not. The opposite of being poor is having margin. Margin in your bank account, margin in your schedule, margin in your mind, enough room to breathe, enough room to make one good decision without 10 bad ones breathing down your neck. That is why some people can make modest incomes and still build stable lives, while other people make more money than they ever have and still feel one bad month away from panic. They are living inside what I call the low-income engine. And an engine is the right word because this thing feeds itself. One problem creates the next. One bad habit makes the next one easier. One emergency drains the very strength you would have needed to prevent the next emergency. Round and round it goes until a man wakes up at 58 years old, sitting at his kitchen table before sunrise, staring at a checking account he has been trying to fix for 20 years. He is not lazy, he is not foolish, he is worn down. There is a difference. In this video, I want to walk through the 5 forces that keep ordinary people stuck at low income longer than they should be. Not because I believe every man can become wealthy, life is harder than that, but because I do believe a lot of people could become more stable, more secure, and a good deal more free if they understood what was really happening to them. We are going to talk about the emergency drain that keeps you fragile, the relief trap that turns stress into spending, the hourly ceiling that punishes effort without leverage, the social drag that makes other people's habits more expensive than your own, and finally, the compounding divide, the line between people whose money quietly grows and people whose debt quietly eats them alive. If you can see these 5 forces clearly, you can start breaking them one at a time. And that matters because most people do not ruin their financial lives in one dramatic moment. They ruin them in small, ordinary ways. The first force is what I call the emergency drain. This is where low income becomes more than a number. It becomes a condition of constant exposure. No cushion, no protection, no room for life to go wrong. A lot of people think the first sign of financial struggle is debt. I do not think that is true. I think the first real sign is fragility. The feeling that one ordinary inconvenience can knock over the whole table. The battery dies, the air conditioner quits in July, your prescription costs more this month, your hours get cut for 2 weeks, your son calls and says the baby needs medicine and he is short on cash. None of these things are rare. None of them are shocking. They are just life. But if you do not have a buffer, life starts charging interest on your weakness. That is how a small problem becomes an expensive problem. You cannot pay the bill today, so now there is a late fee. You cannot fix the car at the mechanic you trust, so you go to the quick place that charges more. You cannot buy enough groceries for the week, so you make little trips to the convenience store and pay too much every time. You cannot afford the decent pair of work boots, so you keep replacing the cheap pair that never lasts. People talk about bad decisions as if they happen in a vacuum. They do not. A frightened mind makes expensive choices. A tired mind reaches for speed. A stressed mind wants relief, not efficiency. That does not mean personal responsibility goes away. It means responsibility has to be matched with reality. If a man is trying to solve long-term problems while living in short-term panic, he is going to make worse decisions than he would make with $1,000 in a separate account and a little sleep in his system. This is why I have always believed the first goal is not investing. It is not a side hustle. It is not trying to look successful. The first goal is to become a little harder to knock down. $500, $1,000, maybe $1,500 depending on your life. Not for vacation, not for Christmas, not for a television, for interruption control. That little pile of cash is not just money, it is decision-making power. When you have no buffer, every surprise feels personal. It feels like the world is picking on you. When you have a buffer, the same surprise is still annoying, but it is no longer a crisis. And once something stops being a crisis, you can usually solve it for less money and with less damage. That is what people miss. A buffer does not just protect your wallet, it protects your judgment. And judgment is expensive when you lose it. I have seen people skip this step because it feels too small. They want to do something impressive. Open the investment account, start the business, buy the rental property, talk about financial freedom. But a man with no emergency reserve trying to chase wealth is like a homeowner putting granite countertops in a house with a leaking roof. Wrong order. Security before strategy, stability before growth. If your life is constantly being reset by small emergencies, you are not really building, you are recovering. That is the first force. Now, the second one is harder to admit because it lives close to the heart. I call it the relief trap. This is where people spend money, not because they are irresponsible, but because they are exhausted. A lot of financial advice is too cold on this point. It talks about spending as if every purchase were made by a calm, rational person with a full fridge, a rested body, a good marriage, and a peaceful mind. But that is not how a lot of Americans live. A lot of people are carrying stress all the time. They are worried about bills, worried about aging parents, worried about layoffs, worried about retirement, worried about looking like they are falling behind. And stress does something dangerous. It makes relief feel like wisdom. So a man works all week, comes home drained, and buys dinner out 3 nights because he cannot stand one more decision. A woman feels embarrassed about where she is in life and buys something nice she cannot afford because for 20 minutes it makes her feel less invisible. Somebody upgrades the phone, the truck, the shoes, the purse, not because they have a real plan, but because they are trying to feel normal again. This is not always greed. Sometimes it is pain management. That is what makes it dangerous, because when spending becomes emotional anesthesia, it stops obeying logic. You are no longer asking, can I afford this? You are asking, can I bear how I feel without this? That is a different question altogether. And the trouble is, the comfort fades quickly, but the bill stays right where it is. The meal is gone, the package is open, the newness wears off, but the balance remains. And now the person is not only stressed, they are stressed and ashamed. That is a bad combination. Shame often leads to secrecy, and secrecy is where financial trouble starts multiplying in the dark. Most people think frugality is mainly a math problem. It is not. It is an emotional regulation problem. If you cannot sit with discomfort, you will pay to escape it. Maybe with a credit card, maybe with subscriptions, maybe with a car payment you do not need, maybe with little daily leaks that look harmless until they become a monthly wound. Temporary relief, long-term pressure. That is the relief trap. The way out is not to become some joyless monk forever. Life is hard enough. But for a season, especially if you are trying to get out of low income, you have to retrain what relief means. You have to learn to get satisfaction from control instead of consumption. That is a real shift. When a man starts feeling better because his checking account is no longer gasping for air, something important changes in him. When he starts taking quiet pride in a paid-off credit card instead of a new gadget, he is no longer playing the same game. When he learns that saying no today can make next month easier, he stops living like a hostage to impulse. People laugh at simple pleasures. Coffee at home, packed lunches, wearing the same coat another winter, driving the old truck another 2 years, canceling the subscriptions nobody really uses. Those things are not flashy, but they do something flashy habits never do. They return dignity. A man who can deny himself something he wants is more powerful than a man who keeps buying things to prove he matters. That is the second force. The third is what I call the hourly ceiling. This one traps good people, hardworking people, responsible people, the kind who were told all their lives that if they just kept their heads down and worked harder, things would eventually turn around. Sometimes hard work does pay off, but effort alone has a ceiling. There are only so many hours in a week, only so much overtime your body can take. Only so many weekends you can give away before your health, your marriage, your patience, or your spirit starts sending you a bill. That is the lie a lot of low-income workers live under. They keep trying to solve a leverage problem with more exhaustion. Second job, extra shift, night route. Weekend delivery. More motion, less progress. And the worst part is, because they are moving all the time, they feel productive. Busy can feel like progress, even when it is just survival in work boots. Now look, I am not against honest labor. There is dignity in work. There always has been. But low income often persists because a man is trapped selling hours in a world that rewards leverage, specialization, and usefulness that can scale. If you are paid only when your body is present, your income has a natural limit. Meanwhile, your costs do not respect your limit. Rent rises, insurance rises, food rises, prescription costs rise. 1 year you get a modest raise and feel hopeful. 6 months later, inflation has eaten it and you are right back where you started, except older. That is why some people feel like they work more every year and own less every year, because motion is not the same thing as lift. The way out of the hourly ceiling is not always quitting your job and chasing some fantasy. Most people do not need fantasy. They need a second layer of value, a skill you can add, a function you can combine, a problem you can solve that fewer people around you can solve. A maintenance worker who learns basic sales starts becoming more than a pair of hands. A receptionist who learns scheduling systems, customer retention, and simple bookkeeping becomes harder to replace. A truck driver who understands dispatch software and route efficiency becomes more valuable than a man who only turns the wheel. A barber who learns local marketing and client retention builds a business, not just a chair. The market does not pay well for effort by itself. It pays better for usefulness that is harder to substitute. That is a hard truth, but it is a useful one. You do not always need to become the best in the world. Sometimes you just need to become less common. One decent skill layered on top of another can change a man's earning power more than 1,000 extra tired hours ever will. And yes, learning a new skill when you are already worn out is hard. No point pretending otherwise. But if all your energy goes toward preserving the same paycheck structure that keeps you stuck, then fatigue becomes a trap all by itself. Work more is not always the answer. Work differently often is. That is the third force. The fourth one is rarely discussed honestly, because it gets close to family, friendship, and loyalty. I call it social drag. A great many people are not only carrying their own financial habits, they are carrying the attitudes of the people around them, and sometimes those attitudes are heavier than debt. Spend a little time around complainers, excuse makers, and chronic financial chaos, and you start thinking their habits are normal, not because you are weak, because human beings adapt to the room they live in. If everyone around you treats debt like a permanent roommate, you start treating it that way too. If everyone jokes about being broke while still spending every refund, every raise, every bonus, then discipline starts looking strange. If everybody talks like the system is unbeatable and personal change is pointless, eventually you stop trying before you even begin. That is social drag. It is not always open hostility. Sometimes it is subtle. Somebody laughs at your budget. Somebody rolls their eyes because you packed lunch again. Somebody calls you cheap because you will not split the cost of another restaurant meal you cannot afford. Somebody gets uncomfortable when you start making better choices because your discipline shines a light on their disorder. Not everybody wants you to fail. But not everybody is comfortable watching you leave the habits they still live inside. And family pressure can be even harder. A middle-aged man finally starts getting his feet under him, and now he is helping grown children every month because they are still living like they are 22. A woman in her 60s finally pays off one bill, and now she feels guilty saying no to relatives who always seem to have some emergency. A retired couple downsizes and starts living sensibly, and other people in the family take it as a sign they are now available to rescue everyone else. That is not generosity. That is financial erosion dressed up as love. You cannot build stability if your life is surrounded by habits that keep pulling you back toward chaos. That does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean turning your back on everybody who ever knew you, but it does mean learning that proximity has a price. The people you listen to shape what starts sounding reasonable. If the voices around you make discipline feel extreme and waste feel normal, you had better get some new voices in your life. Maybe not at the country club, fine. But books exist, interviews exist, libraries exist. Thoughtful men and women have left behind enough hard-earned wisdom to build a better internal circle than a lot of people ever had in real life. You can spend an hour listening to people who complain or an hour listening to people who think clearly. Do that often enough and your standards change, your language changes, what you tolerate changes, and once what you tolerate changes, your life usually follows. The people around you do not determine your future all by themselves, but they do make certain futures easier. That is the fourth force. Now, the fifth force is the one that quietly decides where all this ends. I call it the compounding divide. This is the line between people whose money starts carrying some of the load and people whose debt keeps adding more weight to their back. Compounding works whether you understand it or not. That is what makes it so powerful. It never asks for your permission. It simply starts with what you feed it. Feed it credit card debt, and it will grow that burden while you sleep. Feed it savings, ownership, and time, and it will grow that too. That is why two people can live on the same street, make similar incomes, and end up in very different old age. One has spent 20 years paying interest, the other has spent 20 years earning some. The first person feels every month like a tug of war. The second person still has problems, still has bills, still has setbacks. But there is a quiet engine turning in the background. That engine matters more than people think. A lot of folks imagine investing as something for the rich, some polished world far away from ordinary life, but the real dividing line is much simpler than that. Are you building anything that grows without your immediate labor, or are you only paying for things that decline, depreciate, and demand more from you next month? Assets versus appetite, future security versus present display. That is the compounding divide. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not talking about wild speculation. I am not talking about chasing hot tips or pretending every person watching this video should go start trading stocks tomorrow morning. That is not wisdom. That is another form of gambling with better vocabulary. I am talking about a basic shift. First, stop feeding the worst debt. High-interest debt is a thief that charges rent on your weakness. It turns ordinary life into a treadmill. Before you dream about wealth, get serious about shutting down the interest that is eating you alive. Second, once you have some breathing room and some buffer, start owning a little something that can grow. For many people, that means simple, boring, disciplined investing over time. Not exciting, not glamorous. But then again, a lot of the things that actually work in life are not glamorous. $10 a day, $50 a week, a fixed amount every payday, small enough to feel unimpressive, consistent enough to matter later. People dismiss slow accumulation because it does not flatter the ego. It does not make for a dramatic story. But financial security is usually not built by drama. It is built by boring behavior repeated longer than most people can stand. That is why so many fail at it. Not because it is impossible, because it is quiet. And quiet work is hard for people who want immediate proof. But the day your money begins earning even a little on your behalf, the ground starts shifting. Maybe not enough to retire, maybe not enough to brag about, but enough to know you are no longer standing still, enough to know all your effort is not disappearing into bills the second it arrives. That changes a person. Because the deepest hunger under low income is not always for luxury. Often it is for dignity. The dignity of not panicking every time the phone rings. The dignity of saying no when you need to. The dignity of replacing something because you planned for it, not because you were forced into it. The dignity of getting older without feeling like one bad month could undo your whole life. That is what this is really about. Not getting rich, getting steadier, not showing off, sleeping better, not pretending, owning a little more of your own future. So let me pull all this together. If you are stuck in low income, do not just ask, how can I make more money? Ask better questions. Where am I financially fragile? What am I spending to soothe instead of solve? Am I trapped selling hours with no second layer of value? Whose habits and voices are shaping what feels normal to me? And am I feeding debt or am I feeding something that can grow? Those are better questions because they point to the actual machinery. The emergency drain makes every setback cost too much. The relief trap turns stress into spending. The hourly ceiling keeps effort from turning into lift. The social drag makes chaos feel normal. The compounding divide decides whether time is helping you or quietly hurting you. That is the low-income engine. And once you can see the engine, you can stop blaming yourself for every symptom and start fixing the design. Not all at once. That is another mistake people make. They try to change everything in one burst of emotion. New budget, new job plan, new life, new discipline. By next month, they are worn out and ashamed again. Slow down, one repair at a time. Build the buffer, cut the leaks. Learn one useful skill, protect your mind, own a little something that grows. It may not look dramatic from the outside. A smaller lifestyle, a paid-off card, a separate savings account, a Saturday spent learning instead of spending, a used car kept another 3 years, dinner at home, fewer subscriptions, better boundaries, more patience, less pretending. That does not look exciting, but I will tell you something. A calm checking account is exciting. A paid bill is exciting. A man in his 60s who no longer has to fake prosperity is exciting. A woman who can cover her medicine, keep the lights on, and sleep without dread is exciting. Peace is exciting when you have lived without it. And that is the thing many people learn too late. Financial freedom is not really about glamour. It is about reducing fear. It is about creating enough order in your money that your life is no longer constantly being pushed around by small emergencies, old habits, other people's expectations, and your own tired impulses. You do not need to become a different person overnight, but you do need to stop cooperating with the things that keep you weak. That may be the real turning point. Not the raise, not the lucky break, not the fantasy of sudden wealth. The moment you stop financing your own instability, that is when a life begins to change. And once it changes enough, low income is no longer a cage. It is a season you are leaving behind. In the end, escaping low income is not just about making more money. It is about breaking the forces that keep pulling you back down. A lot of people work hard, save a little, and still feel stuck because the real problem is deeper than income alone. Emergencies drain their strength, stress turns into spending, hourly work keeps their earnings capped, the wrong people keep their mindset small, and debt compounds faster than progress. That is why real change begins with stability, not appearances. It begins when you build a small buffer. Stop using spending as emotional relief, learn skills that increase your value, protect your mind from negative influences, and start putting even small amounts into assets instead of liabilities. None of this looks flashy, but that is the point. Quiet discipline is often what saves a life. The deeper lesson is this: poverty is not only a lack of money, but a loop that affects the mind, habits, and future of a person. The way to apply this today is to stop trying to fix everything at once. Start small, but start seriously. Build an emergency fund, cut one unnecessary expense, learn one skill that can raise your income, and make one decision this week that helps your future instead of only relieving today's pressure. That is how escape begins. Before you go, what do you think keeps most people stuck the longest? Emergencies, emotional spending, low-value work, bad influences, or debt? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can learn from each other. And if you found this helpful, please subscribe to the channel to support us and give us the motivation to keep making more meaningful videos.